More than ever before, the human race seems willing to surrender spiritually and emotionally to a charismatic leader who can offer peace and prosperity to a world trembling on the brink of ecological and social collapse, international financial chaos, and a nuclear holocaust. Well-known New Ager Benjamin Creme claims to be the coming world leader's advanced public relations man. In 1982, full-page advertisements around the world announced the coming of Creme's New Age Christ, which gave fresh hope to millions. At this press conference in Los Angeles, he described how this Christ would make himself known.
It is a truism today to say that we are at the dawn of a new age, the age of Aquarius. And it is important to remember that all of the great religions await the coming of a teacher. The Christians await the return of the Christ. The Muslims await the Imam Mahdi. At the same time, the Buddhists await the coming of another Buddha. The Hindus await the return of Krishna, and the Jews, as always, await the coming of the Messiah. I'm speaking today about the return of such a teacher.
Christians are awaiting the return of the resurrected Jesus with the nail prints in his hands and feet. But the followers of the gurus are awaiting a coming world ruler who won't even claim to be Jesus, but the latest reincarnation of the Christ Spirit, and he will have the psychic powers to prove it.
Simultaneously, throughout the world will take place hundreds of thousands of spontaneous healings and cures, which will reinforce, if that were even necessary, the fact that it is the Christ himself. The day of declaration will be the outstanding event of this or any other century. On that day, the radio and the television networks of the world will be linked together. We shall see this extraordinary face on our television screens. But he will not speak. His words will drop silently into our minds in our own language. He will indeed inaugurate a great new world religion, and at the very most sacred core of that new world religion will be the process which is called the esoteric initiations, which take us out of the strictly human kingdom into the kingdom of God.
He has been expected for generations by many religions. Christians await him as the Christ, Jews as the Messiah, Muslims as the Messiah or as the Imam Mahdi. Hindus look for Krishna, and Buddhists the fifth Buddha. Our guest, Benjamin Creme, has one of the most provocative messages of our time, that all the religions, without knowing it, are awaiting the return of the same individual, even though they call him by different names. And what's more, that this individual is already among us. Already among us, Benjamin, I'm sure comes as news to most people who are hearing this. Are there, in fact, those in the world for whom this is not news, who have, in fact, seen him?
Oh, indeed. There are thousands of such people all over the world. One particularly well media documented event was in Nairobi, in Kenya, in June '88, when he suddenly appeared out of thin air, I mean literally out of thin air, at a prayer meeting attended by 6,000 people. Who instantaneously recognized him as the Christ. And about 30, 40 people around him, close to him, were entirely healed. They walked off, threw away their crutches.
But overall, it would be fair to say that he's kept a somewhat low profile in appearing.
Yes. He works within the law governing our free will. And most people who give any kind of thought at all to the idea of a Christ returning to the world, visualize him coming down on a cloud, you know, from heaven, tremendous dramatic event, waving a rod of power, surrounded by angels blowing trumpets and so on. In fact, he said, sleep not, keep awake, keep alert, for I come like a thief in the night, in such an hour as you think not. And that's exactly what he has done.
You're talking about the second coming. Question might be, are you a missionary, a theologian? What are you, and where is this all stemming from?
None of these things. I'm not an evangelist, a missionary. I may be a man with a mission, but not a missionary. You know, there is a difference. I am a painter, an artist, who was contacted way back in 1959 by one of the close disciples of the Christ. The Christ is really not the name of an individual. It's the name of a great master, a great, powerfully, highly evolved man. In fact, the master of all the masters. And the masters are men like us who have really preceded us in evolution and finished this evolutionary path on which we are all set. I was contacted by one of these masters who lives in the Himalayas early in '59. He sent another disciple to tell me that I was being contacted, and then he contacted me himself. And soon after that, he said, now our master, the master of all the masters, has something important to tell you. And then the voice of his master, the Lord Maitreya, to give him his personal name, who is the master who embodies what we call the Christ principle.
Lord Maitreya is not a name which most Christians would associate with the Christ. What is his relationship to the Christ?
Maitreya and the Christ are one and the same individual, and he worked through Jesus by overshadowing Jesus 2,000 years ago in Palestine. His consciousness entered into that of Jesus at the baptism, and from the baptism to the crucifixion, Jesus was the Christ. This time, the Christ himself, the Lord Maitreya himself, has come into the world.
Benjamin, why has he returned now? Is there any particular relationship to the year 2000, or what's known as the millennium?
Yes, it's a cosmic date that determines his coming. See, our sun is traveling around the heavens in relation to the constellations. There are 12 constellations which make up what we call the zodiac. And approximately every 2,150 years, our sun comes into an alignment with each of these constellations in turn. The energies given to us, radiated to us by the particular constellation with which our sun is in alignment, create the conditions of our various civilizations. They give it a particular quality. We were in the age of Pisces. This is now coming to an end. It was inaugurated by Jesus as the Christ 2,000 years ago. Maitreya has returned to take up the work which will be really the work of the cycle of Aquarius.
You certainly, I would guess, are not the only person, the first and only person to have gotten this information. Are there some antecedents to it?
I'm a student of esotericism, and that tradition posits the whole history of the race and the reappearance not only of the Christ, but of a succession of avatars down through the ages. There has never been an age, a cosmic cycle, without such a teacher coming before humanity, teaching, giving us the steps which will lead us on to a further expression of our potential, which is our potential divinity.
So is this really the message of all these teachers, is to be sort of a coach for humanity in a sense? Is that their purpose
teachers,
for being here?
Indeed.
Not to erect religions, or is it?
Well, religions have most times been erected around them, but they themselves never claimed to be divine. But most teachers have been made into, even the Buddha, who didn't even postulate a god. He is made into a god, worshipped by Buddhists and so on. The Christ is made into a god by his followers, and Muhammad, if not exactly a god, is nevertheless worshipped as if he were a god.
And didn't Jesus say not to create idols?
Indeed. All of these teachers have been idolized. They have all been put up into heaven or nirvana or someplace well out of the way, so that humanity could get on with its everyday corruption. That's what it's all about. If there is nobody actually, living among you as a living presence and a living teaching, then of course you can be as corrupt as you like. That's what humanity does.
Let's go back to your story. We have this antecedent of the esoteric teachings, and you were contacted about this emergence. Did you expect it?
No, not at all.
You didn't expect it?
Not at all. I knew about the masters, but I wasn't expecting any kind of contact. But
this communication that you had first from the master and then from Lord Maitreya, how did it come to you?
It's telepathic.
You hear a voice inside, only it doesn't go through the
Well,
air
in the
itself.
beginning it was a loud voice. He has listened and listened, that voice, until it's a thin kind of murmur. But it
still gets the point across.
Yeah, sure.
You got the message first from a master and then from Maitreya himself. And what did he say?
He said, I myself am coming, and far sooner than anyone thinks possible. It will be in about 20 years. In the event it was 18 years. And he said, and you will have a role to play in my coming if you accept it. And then the master said, well, you've heard something today which has changed your view of things, the time is coming when you will be expected to act upon this and affirm his coming. He said that on 2 occasions, and then he dropped the whole subject for years and years and years, and I gradually forgot about it. Until 1972, when the Master began to train me and prepare me in very precise and scientific ways for the work which I've been doing ever since, which is really preparing the way somewhat for the Christ, creating the climate of hope, of expectancy for his coming, so that he can enter our lives without infringing our free will. That's what it's all about.
Because of the fact that Maitreya, the Christ, does not fit the exact mold of the traditional picture of the Christ, that some people would be a little bit skeptical and may even wonder if this is the Antichrist that you're talking about.
Oh, indeed. It's a completely mistaken idea of what the Antichrist is. The Antichrist is not a man, it's an energy. It's a force. It's deliberately released to break down the old order. It was released in Roman times through the Emperor Nero to break down the Roman dispensation to prepare the way for Christendom. It was released again in our time through Hitler, with a group around him in Nazi Germany, together with a group of militarists in Japan and another group in Italy. And these 3 powers, the Axis powers in the war with the Allies from 39 to 45, embodied the energy we call the Antichrist. It has been, it's gone, it's done its destructive work. It is behind us and has prepared the way for the coming of the Christ.
What are the primary reasons he has returned?
He has come to show humanity how to live together in peace as brothers and sisters of one humanity. He says this is easier than you imagine. It requires only the acceptance of the principle of sharing. He says we have a choice. We could go on in the ways in which we're going now, which are leading us to the edge of a precipice and destroy all life on this planet, or accept that we are brothers and sisters of one humanity under the one God, and therefore the food, the raw materials, the energy, the science, the educational facilities of the world belong to everybody and have to be shared more equitably around the world, so that you no longer have what he calls this blasphemy of millions of people literally right now starving to death in a world which is overflowing with food.
Why has the Christ stayed so behind the scenes when there are millions of people starving in the world? Why doesn't he come out and solve the problem?
By karmic law, he cannot simply create all the food and share it out and give it to all the starving millions. And we would say, oh, that's good. We don't need to do anything about this, you see? Clap our hands. This absolves us from our right to do it. It's our problem.
But this obviously means a great change in political systems.
Indeed, and of course we're witnessing that taking place right now.
Yes. Talk a little bit about that. What is his role, if any?
He has poured into the world a new energy, which he calls the energy of equilibrium. And this brings about harmony in the world. It acts through the law of action and reaction, which, as you know, are opposite and equal. And by its action, its harmonizing action in the world, we will create out of the present violence and tension and discord and unhappy conditions a period of peace, tranquility, mental and emotional poise, and in exact proportion to the existing disharmony, disequilibrium. Through this law of cause and effect, our negative, destructive thinking patterns, thought forms, create the extraordinary disturbance in the weather patterns all over the world. And as soon as we come into equilibrium, they too, nature itself, will come into equilibrium. So he's seeking to show the interconnectedness of everything. He said everything in creation is composed of atoms, and all of that atomic substance is interconnected. So when you, by your destructiveness, destroy the pattern, the existing cohesive pattern in one aspect of that creation, you set loose a chain of reaction which inevitably causes further destruction in other parts of that creation. For instance, the major cause of the prevalence of powerful destructive earthquakes today and all the loss of life that goes with it is our underground nuclear testing.
Atomic testing.
And he says every time you destroy the planet, which we're doing. Our ecology is totally imbalanced at the moment. We're destroying the very oxygen-producing trees, you know, huge areas every day. He says, when you do this, you're actually harming yourself. We have to learn that every harm we do to anything else is a direct harm to ourselves.
In thinking about the changes that are happening in the world, people can't help but notice the corruption that is being brought to the surface and certainly being given a lot of airplay by the news media, both in the United States and in Europe as well. Does this have anything to do with the stimulus of Maitreya?
This corruption is a purification process. As it rises to the surface, it can be resolved. We recognize it for what it is. And more, as people respond to the energies which he pours into the world, this takes place and people grow in awareness. They were aware of corruption before, but their awareness was of a different nature. They simply knew it happened. But now they are aware that it is wrong. And that is why they've turned on the leaders in East Germany, in Czechoslovakia, in Romania, in Russia, in Poland, and so on and so on. One can go on, in South Africa, and all over the world. This tendency is towards not only democracy and freedom, but to cleansing the body politic. And so bring in those who really care altruistically about the well-being of all people. So suddenly, in a place like Czechoslovakia, you don't get a politician at the head of affairs, you get a playwright. And this is foretold by Maitreya.
Let's get back to Maitreya himself. How does he appear?
The most common is to appear to people in their dreams. And this has happened to people by the thousand all over the world, in every country. That's the most common way. The second is to appear to people as a kind of apparition. You know, they have a vision of him. It's not a dream, they're awake, but it's not solid either. It's somewhere in between. That's also very common. And then he will appear just like you, as a solid physical man, suddenly appearing in a room or a street or whatever, people in a park bench sitting there, and he'll suddenly appear beside them, looking however he may wish. He can change his appearance at will. Some people see him as an old man, maybe dressed in rags. Other people see him as a young man. Nearly always he dresses in the community in London in white Pakistani clothes with a little skull cap, crocheted skull cap on his head. He's neither young nor old. And he has a bit of a beard, dark beard here, dark, lustrous eyes and very high cheekbones. He's very tall and slim. That's the normal way he's seen.
Is he acting alone in this coming out?
He will eventually be followed into the world by about 40 masters from all parts of the world. There's one in New York. There's one here in LA, in the mountains, just above LA. There is one in London. There's one in Geneva, one in Darjeeling, one in Tokyo, one in Moscow, one in Rome. The one in Rome is the well-known master known to all Christians as Jesus. The Master Jesus. Jesus, who was in Palestine, is a great master, works closely with Maitreya moment to moment, and has been living in Rome for over 3 years. The Vatican knows this story. They know that all I'm saying is true.
Why are they keeping a lid on it?
You have to ask them.
Well, I'm asking you. There must be some reason that you're at least partially privy to.
We all know that the Roman Catholic Church is probably the most conservative, the most cautious establishment on earth. So for the Pope to come out with this, in fact, for any representative of the Vatican to come out with this is as amazing as the coming down of the Berlin Wall.
If you've just joined us, we are speaking with Benjamin Creme, who is bringing a message of the reappearance of the Christ, who is not only, he says, Christ for the Christians, but the Messiah to the Jews, the Imam to the Muslims, and to some other Muslims, the Messiah as well, Krishna to the Hindus, and the fifth Buddha to Buddhists. Give us, average folk, a sense of what the mission is and what role we have to play in it, because I assume that they're not just going to wave a magic wand.
Absolutely not. We have to change the world. There are scientists in the Soviet Union and in the United States, and this is known to the governments in each country, who have been given the beginnings of a new technology, which Maitreya calls the technology of light. And this is known to your leaders, it is known to the Russian leaders. If the superpowers can live together in peace, then the whole of humanity can live together.
What about the relationship with the so-called third world?
This is something else. This has yet to be addressed. The developed world uses and wastes 83% of the resources of the world. The developing world, where the vast majority of the world's population are, have to make do with 17%. But you know what, and people don't know, they say, well, we give them aid and we give them all the help we can. Do you know what that aid amounts to?
What's that?
It's really a form of usury. Last year, $40 billion more came from the developing world to the developed world in repayment of loans, the interest on the loans, than went the other way in new loans. $40 billion.
Isn't the whole international monetary system or systems part of the problem too?
Indeed. He says the new creed of all the nations is the economy. And at the basis of this is what is called market forces. Now, market forces he calls satanic forces. They follow only greed and possessiveness. They don't answer necessity. If they answered necessity, then they would be good. But they don't answer necessity. The necessity, for instance, of the third world, who are also dominated by market forces, but market forces manipulated by the developed world. Greed and possessiveness is the result of conditioning. It's the result, he says, of people not knowing who they are.
And what are we really?
He says, really, the only thing that matters, he says, is the self.
How does a person become aware of the self? How do you get to know the self and what it is?
It grows through honesty of mind, sincerity of spirit, and detachment. People think one thing, say another, and do something entirely different. That's dishonesty of mind. Do what you think, be what you think, be who you are, and don't follow other people, don't imitate.
What do you mean by sincerity of spirit?
It is to be sincere to what you actually believe, what you actually experience moment to moment in life, and to be your own man, in a word, or woman. And detachment is the process whereby you become more and more detached from the illusion that you are the body, that you are this set of emotions, that you are the mind, the constructions of the mind are you. You say, I say to you, what are you? I say, oh, I'm a communist. I've been a member of the party for 25 years. You're not a communist. There's no such thing as a communist. There are only people who believe in this mental concept, which we call republicanism or capitalism or communism or whatever. He says these isms are drugs. He said, get away from these isms and be who you are, the divine self. He says you can become aware sometimes that there is something behind you, around you, that you're not alone, that you're involved in some living presence. That is the self. That is the Almighty.
What has yet to happen before most of the world, or if not all the world, sees Maitreya?
He has predicted a world stock market crash, which he said will begin in Japan, and it's already beginning in Japan. And he says this will bring humanity to its senses. It will bring a whole new set of priorities to bear. All governments eventually will have to subscribe to it. The first is the provision of adequate, right food for all the people. Two, the provision of adequate housing and shelter for all the people. Three, the provision of adequate health care and education as a universal right.
What about people who don't get the message or who don't choose to accept it? Is anything going to happen to them?
Well,
they don't go along with it?
They'll be left behind, that's all. Nothing terrible is going to happen to them, except that they will step back from the progression of humanity and slow up their own evolution, that's all. Then they'll die eventually and come back again under the law of reincarnation or the law of rebirth and start maybe this time under better conditions and a better education, and will find themselves perfectly easy to fit into the thing again.
There are some people who, in hearing about the return of the Christ, or reappearance as you call it, the second coming, say that prophecy says we're going to see some signals of this outwardly.
His coming doesn't depend on the signs, but the signs are there for the faithful to kindle the imagination and the intuition that maybe indeed this is the time for the coming of the Christ. So, for instance, all over the world there are manifestations of the Madonna. At Medjugorje, in Italy, in this country, and many other parts of the world. These are created as thought forms, visions, by the Master who was the Madonna. The mother of Jesus 2,000 years ago is now a great Master. These are created by that Master. In this country here, right now, in El Monte, there has appeared some 20 or more crosses in windows, suddenly appearing that were not there before. These crosses emanate energy. People are converted. They have physical and emotional and mental healings as a result. And that's just another of the signs. But if you look at what's happening on the political field in the world, the demand for freedom and democracy, which is sweeping the world, not only in East Germany and the Eastern Bloc, but across the world. Even the states of America, he says, will demand their own independence. Not to break away from the Union, but to be independent within the Union. And this has already started. Places like Vermont are asking for their independence. I was in Dallas just a few days ago, and there's even a part of Dallas which wants independence from Dallas. This demand for independence and freedom and so on is coming to the hearts of everybody around. That's the result of the energy which he pours into the world, which creates this demand for self-expression, for self-identity.
If someone on hearing about this has some level of belief that what you're saying is true, what would you suggest they do about it?
You could say, you know, I kind of believe this, or I don't know if I believe it or not, but I think it could be possible. Or, well, I'd say 5% I believe it, and 95% I have an open mind. But whatever the percentage of belief is, make it known at that level. You don't need to be 100% sure in order to say, you know, I heard this guy talking about. That's all you need to do. That helps to create the climate in which he can the more quickly emerge into the open arena of the world.
What has to happen, and how will all of the rest of us who have not yet seen him see him, and how are we going to know that he is who you say he is?
When we invite him forward. He is creating the conditions which, if they are carried out according to plan, will make a great demand in the world for a sight of him. And when this demand is loud enough, the media responding enough, he will hold a great press conference within the media to which he will present his credentials and expects then to be invited to speak to the whole world, now avowedly as the world teacher. That will be the day of declaration. That will be an extraordinary day. The television networks of the world will be linked together by satellite, which are there for this purpose. All eyes will see him, as it says in the Bible. For the only way in which it is possible for that Bible prophecy to be fulfilled, all eyes will see him, wherever you have television. But he won't actually speak. He would say a word, but his thoughts, ideas, his call to humanity for justice, for sharing, for brotherhood, and therefore for peace, will take place silently, telepathically. And each of us will hear him inwardly in our own language. At the same time, his energy, the Christ principle, the Christ consciousness, the second aspect of the divinity, will flow through the hearts of all humanity. He said it will be as if I embrace mankind. And he said people will feel it even physically. And this will bring about an intuitive, heartfelt response to the message. And at the same time, on the outer physical plane, there will be hundreds of thousands of spontaneous miracle cures all over the planet. And in these three ways, you will know that that one is the world teacher.
Hurt feelings are bound to happen. Just bliss out and fantasize a lot and wear rainbows.